Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. First thing I'd like to do is just call the roll, just so we have an audio record of everyone who's here. So we'll just start with Crispin.
Here.
Okay. Julia Hilton. Julia on.
I'm on a call.
Hey, there's Jen.
Hi. Did you just call my name?
No, I was calling Julia Hilton, but she'll do.
Okay. Sorry.
How are you?
Good. I'm all red in the face. Woo.
Yeah. Don Reading. Jake Nink.
Here.
Thank you. Colleen.
Here.
Abigail.
I'm here.
Okay, great. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we do have quorum, so we can call the meeting to order. First item of business this afternoon is approval of the minutes from our May 5 meeting. I think everyone should have received those or gotten them through the website. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or revisions to the minutes of the May 5 meeting? If not, I would entertain a motion for approval.
Chair Crowley.
Hello.
I move approval of the minutes from our previous meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Crispin. Is there a second?
I second it.
Second by Jen Ellis. Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, the same sign. Being none, the motion carries. Thank you, everyone. The next item we have on our agenda is election of the chair. So right now, what I'd like to do is open the meeting and accept a nomination for chair.
Chair Crowley.
Yes. Abigail.
I nominate Crispin.
Great, thank you. Is there a second to Abigail's motion?
I'll second that.
Eileen, thank you.
Yes, I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. There being none, the motion carries. And Crispin is our chairman. Crispin, welcome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Why don't we finish out, let me just finish out the nomination election for, I'm assuming you're willing to accept the position and vacate your current position in doing so.
Yes, Chair Crowley.
Okay. So that means we also have to appoint or nominate a vice chair. So
Chair
I'd
Crowley?
like to open the,
Chair Crowley,
Yes.
This is Kathy. We will need to do the vice chair nominations on the next regular meeting agenda because we do have to notice that as an item.
okay. All right. Thank you, Kathy. Wasn't sure about that. Had a question about it, but I thought if I was making a mistake, you would let me know.
Thank you.
All right, Crispin, would you mind taking over for the rest of the meeting in your new position?
I would certainly not mind. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, folks. So that moves us along to the next item on our agenda, which is the proposed rental capacity charges. And I will turn it over to Steve.
Great. Thank you, Chair Gravatt. And thank you, commissioners, for joining us. The second item, the rental capacity charges, are going to be presented by Heather Buchanan, and it's a pretty meaty topic. And so it's one of those that we had kind of thought about how did we want to best present. And so what we're going to present today is are the concepts around the rental capacity charge. Talk about what we need to include in the rate schedule for the FY22 budget, but then consider there are several implementation considerations that we're going to come back to you likely in July to talk through kind of how we best implement the rental capacity charge. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and she's going to walk us through a slide presentation framing the need for the rental capacity charge. What is it? And then how do we plan on implementing it rather.
All right, good afternoon. As Steve mentioned, we're going to walk through a proposed rental capacity charge. So today I'll give you some background on why we need the charge, discuss some of the rate details, and share a few examples with you. Then we'll summarize what I've talked about today, and I'll ask you for a motion to approve the proposed fee structure and fees if you so desire. So background first then. So to talk about the fees today, I think we need to step back and talk about a little bit of foundation on just our fee structure overall. You've seen a slide very similar to this, and we've talked about this several times, so it shouldn't be too surprising, I guess, or too different than what we've talked about. So our water renewal fund has two components of its fee structure, two primary components of the fee structure. One side is the operation and maintenance, and the other side is for capital investment. So the operation and maintenance fees, or we often call them O&M fees, are used to fund our day-to-day operations. So the funding from that comes from our service charges, which are our monthly rates. We bill customers on a monthly basis. So by paying that fee, we get service charge revenue. There are also a few other sources of revenue, which one of those includes interest earnings. So we earn interest on any of our fund balances, just like you would on a savings account. So that's interest earnings there. And then on the capital investment side are our capital fees that we have. This is for our facility construction. So as we build new facilities, we need to have fees that support that. So in this case, it would be connection fees. So I'll talk a little bit more about the background behind connection fees in a minute, and then service charges as well. So some of our monthly service charge revenue also funds capital investment. So let's talk a little bit more about connection fees, because that will be some of the basis for our rental charge, our rental capacity charge that we're proposing. So connection fees are paid at the time of connection most often. So when a new customer comes along and needs to connect to a facility or their home to our system, we ask them to pay a connection fee. That fee is proportional to their estimated usage. So we have a standard fee for residents, and then a commercial business or a monitored industrial business, we calculate what their estimated usage would be and charge them for that. In times when it's for a monitored customer or an industrial customer, we also term this purchase capacity. So you'll hear me talk quite a bit through this presentation about purchase capacity. And so if a customer exceeds the capacity amount that they have purchased, we may require them to pay additional fees. And that's where this presentation comes into play. So our connection fees currently have 4 fee components. There's a component for flow, and then our constituents, which right now those constituents are BOD, which is the oxygen demand, TSS, which is suspended solids, and then ammonia is the final one. So how do the fees work? So this is going to explain how the connection fees and O&M fees kind of work in tandem together. So initially, the city will build a water renewal facility. So the facility itself will serve capacity that has already been purchased, and that's represented in my little graphic here in blue. But there is also always a reserve portion of capacity that is built. So the intention there is that we have to be able to serve any capacity for future growth that is needed in the system. And that's also a requirement with DEQ. When we reach a level where we've reached 85% capacity, DEQ requires us to start planning for that next investment capacity for a system. So then the next step is a customer comes along and says that they need to purchase new capacity. They build a building, which is shown up in the upper left hand side then, and then they connect their building to our system, which is the funny little green line. And then we reserve or we set aside capacity in our treatment facility, which is this new little box that's inside the facility. So the size of or the amount of capacity that's set aside for them is proportional, as I mentioned earlier, to their usage for what their used water will be discharged and the constituent loadings that they'll have. So once they're connecting to the system, we require them or ask them to pay a connection fee for that capacity that we're reserving for them. And then last but not least, once the customer's building starts discharging used water to our system, then we start charging them a monthly O&M fee for the treatment of that water. So that is a monthly basis going forward. So was there a question? I didn't. That's Commissioner Chair Gravatt. I got to get the right wording down there. Chair Gravatt and Commission Member Ellis. So the usage is estimated based on how much flow that they're going to have from their facility, and also the loadings that are going to be discharged as well. So we can work, if it's a monitored customer, we'll work with them. Usually a monitored customer has a pretty good idea of how much capacity they'll need. Like, for example, Micron's one of our monitored customers, or B&D Foods, or we have several of them, and they'll be knowing what their production levels are, so they can give us an estimate of that. And so we'll usually charge based on that. For a residential building that's being connected, we have a standard measurement for that, and we assume it's called a single family dwelling equivalent. And for example, on flow, that is equivalent right now to 282 gallons per day. So we have kind of these standards for residential that are set up forward. So hopefully that answers the question there. Okay. All right. So a little bit more background then on our rental capacity charge that we're wanting to propose here. So as I mentioned before, the city does have reserve system capacity set aside to allow for future growth. And that's really intended to be used for that future growth. As new customers come along, we want to be able to have capacity available to sell them. It helps the city with economic development and so forth. So, however, there are times when an existing customer may exceed their purchase capacity. So when this happens, that customer temporarily is using that reserve capacity. Oh, that went the wrong direction. That didn't work. There we go. So in our current water renewal rate structure, we have not historically had a rate that allows us for rental capacity. We've only had a rate that allows us to sell additional capacity. And so in times when a customer exceeds their capacity, but that exceedance is only one time or short term, it puts us in an awkward position. We either have to sell capacity that they may not consistently need, or we don't charge them for that exceedance, which we've had to treat that. And so we should be charging for that. So that's why we're proposing this rental capacity charge to allow us a fee structure that covers those short-term or one-time exceedances and allow us to fairly treat all customers in that respect. So this graph will allow me to kind of describe on a monthly basis what happens and how we implement both of the fees. So when a customer comes on board, as I mentioned, or connects to our system, they purchase capacity. So in this case, this is one of the constituents, and this is an example that we had in the last few years. A customer came to us saying that they were going to be doing construction on their facility, and that construction was going to last 8 months. So their purchase capacity was demonstrated by the orange line that goes across the graph there. And then on a monthly basis, their discharges are represented by the blue bars. So for the first few months, October through December, you can see that their discharges from their facility were well below their purchase capacity. So we're all good to go. When we got to January and they started their construction project, oops, if I can go backwards, that didn't work. I'm going the wrong direction. Sorry about that. So when they started their construction project in January, as we had expected, they exceeded their purchase capacity, and that's shown by the portion of the blue bar that is above the horizontal line there. So we had to decide what we would do for a fee for them. So as we're going forward, when each month, as they discharge, so in October through September, we charge them an O&M fee. So their O&M fee is based on the entire blue bar. So that's the treatment side of it. So the daily operations of our facility, we charge them for the full amount of that operation. So even in January, our rates allow us to charge them the full amount of their discharge, or in February, where they're almost up to 5,500 pounds of TSS average for that month, we are able to charge them for that level. The portion that they haven't paid for in the past would be just the portions that are over the orange line. So this rental capacity fee would allow us to give them a rental fee for that portion for those 8 months and period of time that's above the orange line. If that makes sense, they'd already paid their purchase capacity for anything up to that. Okay. All right. So rate details. Then the rental capacity charge is derived from our current connection fee. So we'll break down the current connection fee down to a unit of capacity, which for flow is gallons per day in this case. And for the constituents, BOD, TSS, and ammonia, it's pounds per day. And then we take that unit rate, multiply that times our monthly rate of return, which is based on our weighted cost of capital. And that equates to the product of those two numbers equates to the proposed rental capacity charge per unit. So for example, for flow, it's just over a penny per gallon. So then in applying it, when an exceedance occurs, our staff will determine whether we should have a rental capacity charge or an actual capacity, if I can say that, capacity purchase. So for a rental capacity charge, these would be times when it's infrequent, short-term, or an isolated incident. A capacity purchase itself would be if there are frequent overages, or if our customer knows that they need to increase their capacity level. Maybe they're expanding their production line or something like that. So for fiscal year 2022, proposed rental capacity charges would be applied to our monitored customers. And this is because to apply these charges, we need to be able to sample and know how much their discharges and what their loadings are. We have other customers, residential and commercial customers, that we don't monitor on a regular basis. So we're not able to, at this time, apply these charges to them. So these are some of the implementation questions that Steve mentioned that we want to bring back to the commission next month and get your feedback on. So we've talked about the structure and what the fee would be. So we need that to be approved if you agree to that this evening, so we can get that put into our fee schedule. Just timing with COVID and meetings and whatnot, timing's a little awkward. We need that put into the rate schedule so that can be approved by council and along with the larger citywide rate schedule that's coming up. But we have time to work through the implementation side of things with you. So some of those questions would be, how much of an exceedance requires a rental fee? If one of our customers exceeds by 10% of their purchase capacity, does that require rental, or should it be at any exceedance level that we want to charge a rental capacity? And then the next question would be related to the duration of that rental period. Should that rental be 1 month, 6 months, up to a year? So we want to get your feedback on some situations there, and we'll give you a little bit of background on that. And then should we have the customer notify us in advance, or can the rental occur after the fact? And likely it will be both, but we'll discuss that a little bit more. And then lastly, when should a purchase actually be required? So when that tipping point between a rental fee versus a purchase, and that's very important as we move forward implementing this. So a couple of examples. So this one would be a 1 month exceedance, and this would have happened. This is an actual occurrence that we've had. Our customer exceeded their purchase capacity. We found this after we do the sampling at the end of the month. So basically the way this works, customers' discharge occurs over the month. We do samples during that month, and that goes to our lab for analysis. At the end of the month, we'll get a lab report, and we know how much the flow is at that time. So we compare that to what the customer's purchase capacity was and determine what the difference is. So the difference is considered the exceedance here in this table. So for flow, that's 160,000 gallons on average per day for that month. And then 75 pounds of BOD, roughly 25 pounds of ammonia. So when you multiply that times the rental charge per unit, the total rental for that month would be just shy of $3,300. So it's not a huge charge. An actual purchase of capacity would be much more, but it ensures that we're actually charging for that rental period that would have occurred. So another example. So this example actually goes back to the graph that I showed earlier in this slide deck. This is the calculation of what that rental fee would be in that case. So for 1 month, the first month, which was January in that graph, the purchase exceedance would have been 605 pounds of TSS. So on each month in that 8-month period, we would charge them the rental fee. So for the first month, that would have been $2,600. By the time we got to the end of the 8-month period, the total rental capacity would have been close, not quite $65,000. All right, implementation. As I mentioned, will be, as we implement this, the charges would apply to our monitored customers. If there's a successful motion for approval of this today, then those fees would be added to our fiscal 22 fee schedule, and we would start implementing those charges October 1st of 2021. We would be encouraging our customers to notify our staff in advance of any possible exceedances that they know about. And this helps immensely on the operations side at our treatment facilities. If our staff can know what's coming to them, they can prepare and balance that in our day-to-day treatment. We're considering that we may give a brief grace period before we actually charge. So the effective date would be October 1st, but just getting into practice with our customers, we may allow for a grace period. And this would be one of the things we would also like to discuss with you next month of how would we implement a grace period. So that we'll come back to you with that as well. So almost done here. So summary then, the rental capacity charge makes sure that we're fairly charging our customers for any excess capacity that they're using without requiring us to sell that valuable reserve capacity. So it would ensure that we have that reserve capacity available when we truly need it to sell to new customers in the future. So today we're asking for approval of the rate structure itself and the rate that we would put into the fee schedule. But next month, as I mentioned and Steve mentioned, we'll be coming back to the commission to ask and settle on some of those implementation questions that I proposed this evening. So here's the motion that we're requesting. I stand for questions if there are any.
Thank you for that. Commissioners, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Commissioner Collette.
Yes, Chair Gravatt, Commissioners. Thank you so much, Heather. The question I have is, so that I'm understanding correctly, they pay a flat rate that allows them to use up to this amount, right? And then if they exceed that, we're talking about how that's structured. But what if they don't reach that amount? Is that taken into account? Or do they only pay for what they use when they're kind of under that level?
Chair, Commission member, that's a very good question. So as long as our customer is for the capacity side of things, as long as they're underneath their purchase capacity level, there's no additional connection fee due at that time, but we don't refund any difference. It's reserving capacity within our facility for them. So we set aside an amount of capacity to serve them. And by doing so, that's our one-time charge. So if they're discharging less than that, there's no difference in the fee for them at that time. We only charge an incremental amount if they've exceeded that for the connection fee. On the monthly charges, though, they pay just an O&M bill, just like you and I receive on a monthly basis. They pay a monthly fee for the treatment side of that up to the level that they discharge.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Commissioner Ellis, did you have a question?
I did, thank you. It seems to me that most of the customers that would care about this it's the commercial market, yes?
Chair, Commission member, yes, that's correct. And actually it's our monitored customers. So there's a small group of customers that we actually monitor their discharge levels every month. And so that is the group that this is going to apply to. And we'll be doing, if this is approved this evening, part of our plan is to do outreach to them so that we'll notify them of this new fee, how it will work, and start working with them. And we're in a very close contact with most of them anyway. So, and monitoring them. So if there's an exceedance right now, we are in touch with them right, as soon as we know about that. So it won't be a surprise, I don't think, to them in that respect.
So I was thinking that it's good to know that it's a small group, that these are, businesses that are most likely monitoring this themselves, that they're trying to already have this on their radar.
That's correct. And we think by having this fee in place, it also encourages them to do that monitoring so that we're sure that it's not unusual. Well, I shouldn't say it's not unusual, but there are circumstances where occasionally they cannot avoid an exceedance, but having a fee like this in place helps them to make sure that they're keeping track of it as well, not just waiting for us to tell them at the end of the month that they exceeded their capacity.
Right. That was the thing that came to my mind is if they're having a fluke month, so to speak, that's going to be an alert for them. I mean, that's what's making me think about this whole month, how many months or 6 months. I'm just thinking about how they are going to want to handle it. So I was trying to think of what other questions I might have and what they might be thinking about. And I'm really glad that you're working closely with them. They're going to want that for sure.
Yes, thank you for the question. And we do work closely. And next month, we can come back and as we give examples and talk through those implementation questions. I think some of the questions you're asking will be a little bit more, I'll be able to frame that maybe a little more clearly so that makes a little more sense to you, I think.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I have a quick follow-up to that, a related question. Are there particular industries or particular types of instances, like you mentioned, short-term construction, that often exceed their purchased capacity?
Chair, that's a good question. So our monitored customers are primarily industrial. So some examples of those are food producers, manufacturing facilities. So it's really a small handful of customers that we would have. Also, our sewer districts would be in that group as well. So it's a pretty small number of customers that this would be impacting.
Awesome. Thank you. Commissioner Crowley, did you have a question as well?
I did, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Questions and a couple comments. Heather, I think the presentation was really nicely done, and what you covered really is something that's very similar in most fixed utilities, in that capacity is added and it's kind of lumpy. In other words, we add capacity in increments that far exceed our needs at the moment that capacity is added. But we build it because there are economies to capture, and it makes sense to have the excess capacity. A couple of things that came to mind as you were going through your presentation. One is the choice of words, or how you characterize this type of service. In the electric utilities industry, we would call it non-firm surplus service. In other words, there's no long-term commitment, and this additional capacity service is provided at the discretion of the service provider, as long as there's surplus capacity available and it's not being used. So my point would be, and the vernacular that you choose in terms of how you present this to any customer that may be interested in this service. I guess the other question I had is, if you have a customer who is continually exceeding their contract capacity requirement, is there maybe a better option to have a penalty or a tiered rate for service when you provide service at a contract level? It has a certain price, but in a tiered rate, if you go above that, that rate is somewhat higher. If you choose to characterize it as a capacity service, then you could legitimately characterize it as costing you extra, and that the customer pays you extra so that he's not incented to take advantage of the service and the service provider by gaming you on the surplus capacity issue. Just one of the questions I had for you. And then generally, with respect to how you price this kind of service, I think you're right in how you're approaching it. If it's non-firm surplus service, it doesn't connote the firm obligation that the service would have, typically as you described it. And so it could be priced at a lower rate, and the revenues could be used as an offset to your cost of service to your firm customers. So I guess the terminology, that we'll be looking at the next meeting would be kind of interesting to follow, how you proceed with that and how you choose to define the service. But in terms of the rate proposal itself, I think it's fine as you have it, as you presented it today. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Chair Gravatt, Commission member, thank you for those comments. And I appreciate your perspective. I know you have a lot of background in this type of rate structures. So, and maybe on your second comment, as far as the customer, if they're continually exceeding, if there could be a penalty or tiered rate, we've discussed that internally a bit. And so I think that's something more that we need to work through and discuss. So that might be something that we could follow back up with you on, because we've wrestled with how we could implement that appropriately. So I might follow back up with you on that one. So I appreciate your comments there.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Was that Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I was wondering, in terms of, it sounds like this makes a lot of sense to move over to the rental capacity charge. But I'm wondering more along the lines of like, is there any energy, water savings? It makes sense, I think, fiscally. But I just wanted to get more discussion along the terms of like, is there any environmental savings in doing this as well?
Chair and commission member, that's an interesting perspective, and I don't know that we've considered that necessarily. Do you want to? I'm trying to think of.
Chair, Commissioner. Yeah, interesting question. I would guess that as I'm thinking about your question, we will capture, so if there's an exceedance of their purchase capacity, as Heather suggested, we'll capture the additional costs to treat the additional used water through our kind of the monthly rate portion of their payment. Is there a benefit to a rental capacity charge, kind of an environmental or a carbon or I don't believe so, but I'd have to think. I mean, we are, by allowing them to rent capacity as opposed to purchase capacity, we are preserving capacity longer term. And I suppose one could argue that by preserving capacity, you'll add less, there'll be less capacity needs, so you won't have to add as much in the future. So maybe you delay, construction of a new clarifier. That's concrete. There is carbon footprint associated with that. But I think it would be challenging to kind of make that direct connection. It's a really interesting point that you're bringing up, though. And in keeping with the intent of the rental capacity charge is to protect our existing kind of remaining capacity to sell our excess capacity. So I think through, as I'm thinking on my feet here, as I think through, I think, not necessarily directly, but I think it does help us in the long run to preserve the additional capacity, the excess capacity, and therefore delay capital investments and, in theory, carbon emissions. Did that help answer your question?
Yes, it really did. Thank you.
Commissioner Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another, I guess, as Steve was talking, I think it's important for us to keep this kind of issue in context, particularly the context of the water renewal utility plan and kind of budgets that we've been talking about for the past few months, and the consequent rate impacts that's going to have on the typical user. So in looking at this particular issue, I don't have any suggestions, but I think it's something we should be thinking about and considering in the context of the overall picture for the water renewal utility itself going forward. Because my concern is that we may start to see some level of pushback on rate increases. It seems like every time a homeowner turns around, there's a new tax, a higher tax, and all the utilities are going up. So whatever we can do to try and mitigate rate impacts, certainly in the context of what needs to be done capital-wise, I think it would be worth keeping that in mind and perhaps elevating its priority a bit in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from my fellow commissioners? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
Chair Gravatt, I move to approve the proposed rental capacity charges described in the staff memorandum in this presentation. The Commission also requests Public Works staff to include the charges in the Water Renewal Fund rate schedule for FY 2022.
There's a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Nink. All right. So it's moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Oppose the same sign. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the next item on our agenda, which is building facility planning, discussion of some strategies, and I will turn it over to staff.
Chair, Commission members, Rob Boastfield is going to present on our building facility planning, and this is a follow-up to a presentation that Rob gave last September. Thank you. And it's showing back or giving back to the Commission the results of the study that we were talking about back in September. You all provided, for those of you on the Commission, you provided information, feedback to us that we tried to integrate into the plan. And so we'd like to share results of the facility planning process, but also we have a section in here. We would like some feedback. I think most organizations, you all are part of organizations that you work at, are going through that transition stage of hybrid work and how is that impacting staffing, office setups, et cetera. So we have a couple of sections in here, or one slide in particular, we want to ask several questions just to hear your perspectives, because you are going through it in your workplaces as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Rob.
All right, Commissioners, Chair, thank you very much. It's good to be here. For those that I have not met or presented to before, Rob Boastfield. I manage our facility program group. And as Steve indicated, this is actually the third topic or third time we've talked to the Commission on this planning effort. And although I know it's the first time for a number of you, this is for information only, and no action is requested. And today we provided a lot of detail in the memo, and I apologize for that, but sometimes it's a little easier to digest that. Today I plan to talk at a fairly high level, go fairly quickly. And then, but of course, as we go, as Steve indicated, there's kind of a few questions I'm really interested for some specific feedback on, but of course, as we go, please ask questions, provide comments as we go is also welcome. So just a little bit of background about the process. Our goal with this planning effort was really to develop a long-term roadmap on how we are going to meet our building needs. And this is really limited to, it's not all of the city buildings. Things like the water renewal facilities, airport, they have their own strategic plans. Their buildings are part of their operations. So we know those are happening separately, as well as some of our operational facilities, such as our libraries and fire stations, again, have their own operational plans that dictate where we have fire stations, how are we going to provide those services. So this effort was really to try to fill in the gaps in the goals, or the gaps in the missing pieces in that. We tried to maintain an awareness of what else is happening with other facilities, but not trying to, again, kind of recreate those wheels. The process that we utilized, we broke it into two pieces. One is looking at our office space needs, city hall type facilities. The other, we grouped the other building needs into a category we call our support facilities, which are things like our maintenance shops, our storage areas, that kind of thing. So we broke those into two groups, but we used a very similar process and kind of ran them in parallel so that we could keep them coordinated. But we really started off with a needs assessment. We picked a 20-year planning horizon, and we tried to project out what we're going to need for space for each of these functions. So, for example, for the office spaces, we looked at community growth projections, tried to add some contingency on top of that, and really tried to take an intelligent look at some functions are going to grow faster than others. For example, our IT department's probably going to grow faster than, say, our print shop. But we tried to get a handle on what we're going to need compared to what we have today to kind of really look at that gap. Then we developed, we kind of brainstormed different ways to meet those needs. And that was actually, we were kind of doing that brainstorming phase at the first review update to the commission. That was probably a year and a half, 2 years. That was probably getting close. Yeah, a year and a half ago, something like that. And that was some of the feedback the commission provided, a few ideas for us to go look at. And as we brainstormed those, we really tried to develop them enough that we could really compare the different strategies. These are all pretty high level strategies, but we also wanted to make them real enough so we could really understand and get a sense of, if we go down this path, these are the issues we might face. As opposed to this, if we go down path B. So as we developed those, then we compared them against each other using a multi-criteria analysis, looking at different factors, and I'll talk about those in a minute, to try to compare overall, how are we, overall, which strategy is the best fit for us. And this was about the stage we were right in the middle of this analysis the last time we were in front of the commission. And then, but basically the results of that comparison, that multi-criteria analysis really helped us form the recommendations that we made. So I wanted to talk about the two different branches separately. Again, similar processes, but a little different outcomes. So our support facilities, again, these are our shops, our fire logistics facility, storage, those kind of functions. We looked at 4 different options, ranging from trying to keep them where we're at and just expand them as we need, to group them all to one location, one big happy family, and several different varieties of that. And the criteria we looked at to compare the different strategies, we looked at cost, and by cost, we took a 40-year net present value. We used 40 years as kind of the approximate life of the buildings. Tried to look at both capital costs as well as relative operating costs. We looked at the outcome, the function, how well would this strategy support the operations for our different teams. We looked at risk, how much uncertainty there was with the option. And then we also looked at kind of the environmental impact of it. And thanks to our climate team for helping us weigh in on that. So with that category, we looked at things like, is it building a new building, has a carbon impact from that, but the new building's more likely to be more energy efficient. We looked at vehicle trips and the emissions. And again, these are pretty high level strategies. we developed the concepts enough to get a sense of, yeah, this one is really going to create a lot more driving. That's a negative, et cetera. And the last category that we looked at was land use. Does the strategy really help line out with where the city's going? Does it put industrial uses in industrial areas, or, does it help solve that kind of thing? And the concept that really shook out as pretty clear, stood above the others, is what we call the hybrid facility or hybrid strategy. And that strategy really involves creating a new campus in an industrial area. We're anticipating it would probably be west of the airport, just because it's a good fit with the land use, and yet also provides pretty good alignment for transportation. So we're not having long vehicle trips, both from an environmental standpoint as well as an efficiency standpoint. But some of the smaller operations that have a lot of have more vehicle trips, we are anticipating could be located closer in, and that really is our communication shop that they work with all the radios and support all police, fire, all those kind of communications functions, and then also our facility services and operations shop that again service like all the fire stations, city hall, rather than. And the reason that we were thinking that they could be closer in is, again, to really minimize the vehicle trips. They're small enough operations that would not be a real negative for a neighborhood or from a land use perspective. This strategy would allow us to better utilize some of our existing downtown shop sites. A good example of this is a photo of our primary parks maintenance shop. It's right in, this is in Julia Davis Park. The zoo is the bottom part of the picture, and that's Myrtle Boulevard across the top. And I find this really interesting. I'd lived here for years, walked by this facility many, many times, never realized there was even a maintenance shop back there. But this is an example. This is a great location for things like housing, and we are essentially camped on it with an industrial use that really, when this was set up 50, 60, 70 years ago, I'm not really sure how old this facility really is, made sense back then, but with our current land use needs, especially demand for housing, we really think it makes a lot more sense. Get this more in a more suitable land use. And it'll also, again, set us up for long-term operations as we do this. The outcome or the office strategies, a couple of things that are different. One, we came up with several different strategies, some more traditional, such as, we need more space, we're just going to go buy or build a new facility. But we also tried to look at a little more, I'll say, out of the box things, such as getting more efficient use of telework, et cetera. And again, that was part of the feedback from the first commission meeting was to really look at some of those, I'll say, kind of more innovative options. And so one thing that was different from the support facilities is that we pretty quickly realized that one specific strategy was probably not the right answer, but it was probably going to be more of a mix. And you saw this with the water renewal planning as well. And so really we looked at different, we call them scenarios. They're really mixes of the different strategies. And like at the bottom of this graphic are the more traditional. We're going to buy or build something downtown, or it's going to be somewhere else. Whereas the top really relied more heavily on efficiencies. The teleworking, and we're kind of calling it a hybrid working because we really envision a mix of in-office and remote working. that can save a space when you look at leveraging office hoteling or sharing workspaces. And so we looked at those range of options. Again, we looked at the multi-criteria analysis. The criteria we looked at were similar, but a little bit different. For each of these mixes or scenarios, we looked at what's the impact for the community. Do they make services easier or harder to access? We looked at the impact to staff. Is it going to be our operations more fragmented, less efficient? Are we creating good spaces for staff or not? We lumped in several different things into alignment with city goals. We looked at things like, does it support transportation, economic development? But we also looked at what's the impact to climate, both in terms of building use, in terms of emissions, like, again, back to the vehicle trips, et cetera. We looked at, again, risk, uncertainty with the strategy. And again, we looked at the net present value in terms of, what's the cost impact. And so we had the team go through and kind of rank with those different criteria. And unlike the support facilities, we really didn't have one that was really head and shoulders above the others. Kind of the leading candidates I have circled in the graphic. And even though they did not, there wasn't one clear winner. There was one clear theme that we felt like could really kind of guide us in the coming years. And what we really took away from it is that near term, we really ought to be looking at this hybrid working, how we can leverage that space efficiency to solve our space issues, our growth issues. And again, we felt like, especially as COVID was in full force, thinking about the future, about that really kind of helped us see the potential for remote working, and really made us think about how that can help both with things like commute trips, but also if it helps us delay when we need to add building space, that seems like both a financial as well as a climate win for us. We do think that longer term, at some point, we will only be able to leverage that so much. But we think that if we can use that efficiency, better use our existing facilities for a period of time, I kind of have around 5 years, but around, however long we can leverage that, we'll be in a better position to understand what really is possible, what the workplace really looks like. But it'll also help us understand what our citizen service needs. I'm really curious to see, after COVID and people have learned to do a lot more like remote access to services, is that going to be the preference for our community moving forward? Will they rebound and want to come back to have in-person services somewhere in the middle? The bottom line is, if we can decide later about where is this facility, is it more public facing or more back of house services, if we can delay those decisions till we understand the world a little bit better, we think we'll be in a better spot. And so super high level, but that's kind of where the outcome from that analysis. We did, as I thought about this opportunity, there were a few things that I would really love to get any feedback on. And the first is, as you've read the memo, heard me kind of talk about our process and the criteria that we looked at. I'm really interested to see, are there other things that we should be considering as we develop our long-term strategies? What are we missing? So maybe I'll pause there and see if there's any feedback or comments on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, or threats from my fellow commissioners?
I'm sure I'll have questions at a later stage, but I will say I think that holding off, it's such a strange time after everything with COVID and people working remotely. And it's been interesting to see kind of just out in the world how many people are choosing to work remotely going forward, but how many other businesses as well have said, actually, no, we can't function without everyone in the office, and people who had flexibility before suddenly are not having flexibility. So I think it makes a lot of sense to just wait, let the dust settle, and see how things actually shake out.
Thank you.
I have a comment too.
Yes, Commissioner Ellis.
I agree with that. It's letting the dust settle is right. I feel like I'm seeing all sorts of stuff. My husband's in IT, and they're definitely back in the office. And I don't think I'm seeing trends anywhere else. I think if people are going back, it's like it's not as much as it was, but I think it's because they're just tentatively slowly going back. And I am curious to see what the trend is.
Yes, thank you. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
And Chair, if I may, that's actually a good segue in, and to the next thing. I'm really, I find it really fascinating to think about the future of work. What's it in person, not even, what all is changing in work, how we interface, virtual meetings, et cetera. And so I'd love to, again, see like what you're seeing, what you're seeing, what you're hearing about how people are adapting and continuing to adapt kind of to the workplace.
If I could jump in, I would temper some of the consideration of hybrid work or offsite virtual work with the question of who prefers which kind of work, especially as younger folks, my age, I'm almost 30, are moving up into more professional roles that we would consider primed for work from home scenarios. A lot of folks are experiencing housing pressures. I live with a roommate who does work from home full time, and we share a 900 square foot place. And so having 2 bedrooms and a living room / office is not ideal for 2 of us working from home. It's not even ideal for 1 of us working from home. So that would perhaps de facto narrow the field of potential employees to those who have access to the kinds of housing that would permit them to have a home office, for example.
Well, and something else to consider would be how many caregivers, and it's probably going to be primarily women, but I don't want to limit it to just women, have stayed out of the workforce because it's too expensive, childcare is too expensive. And so they've chosen to stay home even if they wanted to work because it fiscally just didn't make sense. So if they have the opportunity to work remotely now, how many more of those people are actually going to be able to work, where before they just weren't able to?
Thank you. Are there any other questions or considerations from the commission?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Morgan?
Thank you for the presentation. I think that it was high level, but I feel like it was really a good way to start this conversation. I really appreciated the perspective of bringing in environmental impacts and the impacts to mitigate climate change. So I thank you for that perspective. I do agree that it's hard to say, and we need to let the dust settle. I agree with that sentiment, but working in housing, there is a lack of affordable housing, and I know that you are all aware of this, but I think there is a great pressure to add that component into the mix. just think that it's important to note that we want to build a community that's accessible for everyone, regardless of their income. And so income has become a huge barrier for folks to be able to stay within the city limits of Boise. And so I really appreciate the perspective of if we were to follow models where we would change existing properties into housing, that is a perspective that I think is very needed. I know we can't rush this process, but I just wanted to bring up and mention the fact that I think that's an important conversation, especially in regards to how critical the housing market currently is.
Sorry, Chair, I'd like to add as well, and I'm not really sure how this plays into the discussion that we're having right now, but I think something else to consider that might be a factor in the future that really hasn't been before is that if people are able to telework, the number of jobs in Boise is limited, and if you end up having people living in other areas who are taking jobs here, or even the opposite, people who are living here but they're able to maintain jobs in LA or bigger cities, I think that's something that we haven't really experienced too much of before, and that may change the dynamics quite a bit as well.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments from the commission? All right, hearing none, I think we will wrap this up. Any
Sure.
other? Yeah,
No,
go
Chair
ahead.
and Commission members, thank you for the comments. Good. Appreciate the feedback, and maybe to just kind of quick wrap up on next steps. And Commissioner Morgan, one of your comments about, I appreciate the comments about we can't wait on housing. And just to clarify, kind of the slow down, use telework in efficiencies really applies to the office side. But we do anticipate moving forward with the support facility work, which would free up land for housing. And that's really kind of just wanted to give you a flavor of where things are headed. On the support facilities, we did update the mayor and council on that portion of the plan as well. They're very supportive, very interested. Again, I think from the perspective of freeing up some of the downtown sites for other uses. So we have initiated the strategy that we've developed is really high level. And so we've initiated a more detailed planning effort that includes nailing down, instead of saying probably west of the airport, figuring out these are the facilities, this is the details, what we need, how much we think it's going to cost. We need this much land. We think this is the best site. So we can actually kind of start to lock that in. We anticipate that planning work to be taking about a year. And I really expect that that the mayor and council will want us just to continue on and then start relocating the first of the facilities, whatever shakes out as the highest priority, which I'm guessing will be one of those that starts to free up land. So that's kind of where that's headed. We really do envision that will continue to move forward. Whereas the office side of things, we do really want to test how does teleworking, how does hybrid working, what are the issues? You brought up, it's been very fascinating to me, is like what works for people for remote working and what doesn't. And it's been really interesting. It's everything from can't get good internet here. You mentioned, Chair, about your home situation, whether it's how much space you have, and it's just lots of factors, not to mention the job function, what works and what doesn't. And we really want to learn about that. We're going to be doing a little pilot project with our IT department to understand things like if you've got 20 people hybrid working, they're remote working half the time. can you save half of the spaces? Can you save, a third of the spaces? How does that really work? How efficient is it? And what kind of spaces, what kind of adjustments do we really need to our designs to really best support that type of work? So we really envision smaller scale stuff testing in the next year or two. We do envision that down the road, we'll still need larger scale remodels to really gain some of that efficiencies. And, really beyond that, not so much my world, but on the business end, really just kind of monitor what do customers like? What do they expect from our facilities? How do those things change? So we, again, really appreciate the feedback from the commission, both in the previous and today, and it'll be really interesting to see how this unfolds. That's all I really had. If there are other questions, comments, feedback, I would be happy to try to answer.
Awesome. Any last feedback from the commissioners? Hearing none, I think that we will wrap that up. And I will ask Director Burgos, do you have any other updates for the commission?
I do, Chair Gravatt. A couple of updates. So our June 16th work session, to be determined. I think we're currently scheduled to do it via Zoom, but we're quickly approaching in-person meetings. Pretty exciting. So we'll keep you posted on the status of in-person versus Zoom. At the 16 work session, we plan to cover 3 items. One is parliamentary procedures. So our public works attorney, Mary Grant, will be presenting on just the basics of commission, kind of 101 on parliamentary procedures, Robert's rules, et cetera. We'll be presenting the first phase session, rather, of the geothermal system strategic plan. The first session is really focused on giving you the background of the system, kind of its origins, its historical growth, what are key issues that we deal with today. And then session 2, we'll be getting much more into the strategic vision for the utility over the next 20 years and wanting your feedback on wrapping up that plan, before we wrap it up, the draft, and go to council, we want to get the commission's feedback on the plan. And then the last item will be covering emerging constituents. So back in October, when council approved the water renewal utility plan, one of the 2 council members in particular requested that we keep them apprised of some of our studies related to emerging constituents in used water. And so we'll give you an update. We have been proactively sampling for some of those emerging constituents. And then we're planning for a panel of experts this summer to help frame the broader issues. So national experts, academics who are going to come to Boise to help us better understand, 1, the state of emerging constituents, and then 2, the state of treatment for them, and how we might set up a pilot project as part of a recycled water program moving into the future. So that'll be the 3rd topic. So again, pretty meaty topics, but really interesting. I think you'll find them to be very interesting. And then last but not least, after that, on the 16th, assuming that council approves our climate action roadmap, where we're committing to carbon neutrality for city operations by 2035 and for the community by 2050, assuming that's approved on the 16th, we may have an event out on the plaza starting at 5 o'clock. So the commission work session would be from 3:15 to 5, assuming we can cover all the topics in that time frame. And then we would invite you all to join us out on the plaza, assuming that again, council approves everything. And so we'll keep folks posted on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for those updates. Anything else from my fellow commissioners? All right, hearing nothing, I would just jump in and say thank you all for your support as your new chair. And if any of you in the next month have any interest in or questions about leadership in the commission, whether that is pursuing the vice chairship or any other ideas that you have for the direction that you would like to see the commission take, feel free to reach out to me and we can set up a time to discuss. And with nothing else on the agenda, I would take a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Covet, I motion that we adjourn this meeting.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
Motion and second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, the same sign? Hearing none, the motion carries and we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.